Hey everyone, I'm Logan, the 64th Gear Jammer Skeele, and you're watching Toy Talk. Today's discussion is going to be on scale and what scale means. But first, I'd love it if you'd take time to like, subscribe, and ring that bell to get notified of all of my videos. Also, I've got a free PDF on the subject of scale. Just find it in the description below. Now the big question is this: do you want a unique toy collection that is the envy of all your friends and fellow collectors worldwide? If so, you have come to the right place to learn about all things die-cast and resin. Follow along as I talk about the latest and greatest releases from the top manufacturers in the industry that will make your collection stand out from all the rest. My name is Logan, the 64th Gear Jammer Skeele, and this is Toy Talk. Now the question is this: do you know what scale means? Scale could refer to the scales on a fish. It could also refer to the legend on a map. Or it could refer to a device that's used to weigh objects, such as gold or silver. You get the idea. But for today's discussion, we're going to refer to scale as it applies to model toy building. There are two basic kinds of scale models. The first kind is used to build and test future products, because building scale models are a lot cheaper than building full-size versions. An example of this is airplanes. The designers will build an exact scale model of the plans of the plane that they want to build in real life. They'll take this model and they'll put it in a wind tunnel, which is really cool to watch. That way that they can test the airflow over the wings around the fuselage to make sure the design is structural and to make sure that the plane will hold up in real life conditions. Now, of course, the scale model can only do so much, but it'll give them such a good idea that they know whether their design is good or not. Another example of this I saw up when I was at the Waterloo plant for John Deere back about 1992 or 1993. We were in the lobby and they had two of these beautiful hand-built wooden models of their tractors sitting there. They were quarter scale and they were fully functioning. The PTO, the 3-point, the wheels turned and wrote on electric motors, it steered. Everything was exact as to what they were building in real life. Now, they said that they'd sell these models back then. I don't know about today, but with a big check back then, I could have taken one home. Wouldn't that have been a cool model to have in your collection? The second kind of scale model that's built is of a real object that already exists. They scale it down so that it's small enough to fit on a shelf. And examples of these are cars and trucks. You find these models everywhere. They're designed to sit on shelves or for kids to play with. Now, each one of them has its uses. The first kind is to study the effects on the proposed object, whereas the second kind is designed for either kids to play with or people to collect and enjoy. You know, they're great. They'll allow you to collect all the real cars that you can't either A, afford, or B, don't have the room to keep. After all, who needs 150 cars like Jay Leno does? So you can see scale models have many, many uses. They are used in filmmaking, for designing real equipment and farm machinery. They're designed for collecting. They're designed for kids to play with. Lots and lots of uses. Hollywood, one of the biggest examples going is Hollywood. They use scale models and they're filming all the time. Take Dante's Peak, for example. At the end, they had that scene where there was the two Humvees and the van crossing the bridge that's about ready to be washed away because the dam broke. That was all done in quarter scale. The bridge was quarter scale, the Humvees were quarter scale, and so was the van. When they drove the models over it, though, you couldn't tell. It looked like they were real objects there. But they couldn't afford to send real objects and crash the bridge. That's just too expensive, so they used the models. To further our discussion, we're going to talk about scale models of cars and trucks. Now, what is scale? In math, the term scale is used to represent the relationship between the measurement on a model and the corresponding measurement on the real object. Without scale, maps, blueprints, and other drawings would be pretty useless. I mean, after all, look at a map. What good would a map be if it didn't have a scale on it? You would have no idea how far it is from point A to point B. It could be 2 miles, it could be 2,000 miles. You would have no idea without that scale. So what is a scale model? In general, a scale model must be designed and built based on the theory of similitude. But first, we must understand what the similitude theory means. Similitude is the theory and art of predicting prototype original object performance from scale model observations. It is the relationship between structures such as small size structures called models and life size structures called prototypes. A model is said to have similitude with the real application. To be a true scale model, all relevant aspects must be accurately modeled, such as size, shape, material that are used on the real object, so that the model's interactions with the model world are reliably relatable to the real object's interactions with the real world. For example, to build a real car, the car designers will start with drawings and plans. The concept artists, they're beautiful. They make these wonderful and absolutely gorgeous pictures, and they bring them to the designers, and then the designers start drawing up the plans to figure out how to make them. Then next, the engineers take those plans that are scaled to dimensions, and they will start molding a clay model of these vehicles. That way, they can start to see whether or not the item will actually work. After all, there are certain things that designers and concept artists can come up with that you actually can't build in the real world. They just won't work for one reason or another. And that's where the clay models start to come in. They will show the designers where they have flaws, where things aren't going to work, and then they can start to adjust their plans and come up with something better. Now, I saw these models firsthand when I visited the Auburn-cord-Duesenberg Museum in Auburn, Indiana. If you've never been, please go. Take the time and visit this place. It is absolutely amazing. The building itself is just pure history. The museum is located in the original corporate headquarters of the Auburn-cord-Duesenberg Corporation. How cool is that? You go into the original president's office. You see the lobby. You see the accounting offices. You see all of this stuff from the 1930s and earlier. It's just amazing to go into this place. But anyway, also in this museum, there is the design studio. And in the design studio, they have pictures on the walls of the concepts. Then they have a few clay models where they have worked. So you can see original clay models that have been preserved for the years on how they build cars. Then they have the wooden models, all the way up to the actual models that were used to hammer out the sheet metal for the real cars. This place is just amazing. Please take the time and go see it. I got more links in the description below about the museum. Replicas of already existing real vehicles are reduced proportionally by scale to make a smaller size. Examples of this is cars, trucks, farm equipment, construction. Basically, if you can think of it, somebody has made a scale model of it, including buildings. Common scales that are used to make buses are 1/50th scale. They are also the most common scale for construction equipment. Now, automobiles. They're mainly made in 1/64th, 1/43rd, 1/24th, and 1/18th scales. Big variety for you to choose from. Farm vehicles are typically 1/64, 1/32, and 1/16th. 1/16th is great, a big model that you can use. They can really pack the detail into it, but it takes up a lot of space. 1/64th, though, they can put in a decent amount of detail, but it doesn't take up as much space. It's not as expensive, so you can collect a whole lot. Now, in Europe, the biggest scale for farm is 1/32nd scale, which is half of 1/16th and twice as big as 1/64th. Farm guys were brilliant. They made easy math. Divide in half, take another quarter, and you're there. But the 32 scales, in Europe, they pack in almost as much detail as our 1/16th scales. And they don't take up a lot of space. They are just probably the sweet spot, the best design scale for farm that ever was. You can have a whole lot of detail in a small space. You know, if 32 was big over here when I started collecting, I probably would have had a whole lot of 32 and none of the 16th, because 16th takes up so much space. Engineers will scale down each part of the real truck. And this chart will show you that an 87 scale is approximately 9 to 10 inches. A 64 scale is approximately 13 to 14 inches. A 50th to 53rd scale is 16 to 17 inches. Now the 53rd, that's kind of the oddball scale out there, but at the same time, an American standard trailer is 53 feet, so when you scale that down 53 times smaller than a real one, a trailer is 1 foot. Now that does make some sense in model making. Now 43rd scale and 32 scale, those are much bigger models. 43rd, 19 to 20 inches, 26 to 27 inches is there for a 32nd scale model. That's a good size model. These are primarily made as toys for kids, as the parts are bigger to meet safety standards. And let's face it, guys, we need kids to play with these toys so that they can become collectors in the future. It's the beginning of their journey into collecting. Now, when the engineers measure every part, then they scale it down. A 64 scale model is 64 times smaller than the real thing. That works out to a foot in real life being 3/16 of an inch in 64th scale. That makes it easy for you to measure. You can go out and measure your car and come up with roughly how long the scale model version of it should be. Now we switch over to model automobiles. Model automobiles have been made in many scales throughout time. In Europe, the scales were derived using the British scale for O gauge. The MOROP's specification for European O gauge is 1/45th scale. Don't know how they came up with that, but that's what they came up with. But this doesn't alter the series of cars being made 1/43rd scale. American O gauge is 1/48th scale, which again makes no sense. Why the cars are standardized in 1/43rd. 1/43rd has the largest distribution of cars worldwide, and most of the O gauges in Europe and in America use 1/43rd scale cars to populate their towns and their layouts, because 1/45th and 1/48th are virtually impossible to find. You can find the trains, you can find the buildings, but you just can't find the automobiles in that scale. So they use 1/43rd, showing how collectors and diorama guys take a lot of leeway and liberties in mixing scales that are just close in order to come up with what they want. If you want to have a precise, an almost precise layout, the best scale would be S gauge, because there's tons of automobiles, semis, farm equipment, some construction stuff, all made in S gauge along with railroads. That way you can keep everything basically the same size, unlike any of the other gauges of railroads where it's easy to find trains but hard to find automobiles and cars. In America, scales derived from the architect scale are used. 187, 164, 143, 132, 125, 124, and 1/18 are the most common scales of cars. So as you can see, all scales have been used to make models of cars, trucks, buses, construction, airplanes, and ships all around the world. Note, the bigger the number, the smaller the finished model will be. Example, 187th scale model will be smaller than a 164 scale, which will be smaller than a 1/18 scale. Now I've got this chart, and it'll show you the approximate sizes of models based on the scale that they are. Like a 187th is approximately 1.5 to 2.5 inches. A 164th is approximately 2.5 to 3.5 inches. Side note about 64th, it's typically known as the 3.5 inch scale because most vehicles scale down to roughly 3.5 inches in 164 scale. A big proponent of this is Hot Wheels. They scale everything to 3.5 inches, which makes them close to all the same size, but keeps the card size to hang in the stores the same size. It's a great concept, and most of the vehicles stay about the same size. Then you'll get into 1/18 scale, 10 to 12 inch model. Now this is a good size model. It'll fit pretty well with 1/16 scale farm stuff. Pretty close anyway. and they can pack in tons and tons of detail. Generally, they'll have opening hoods, opening doors, opening trunks, steerable front ends. These models will have it all. Now, there are also a few models that have been made in 1/12 scale. Now, these are great big models. And one of the most popular, beautiful models that was done was a 53 Corvette in 1/12 scale. They were hard to find when they were new, and now they're almost impossible. But if you can get one to put in your collection, it will really, really stand out. In summary, we've looked at the term scale and found out what a scale model really is, and how the theory of similitude applies to the making of scale models. We've learned the two basic kinds of scale models. The first kind is used to study the effects on the real proposed object based on scale model observations to see if it will work. This will save a lot of time and a ton of money. The second kind is to make a reduced size replica of a real object so that it'll sit on your shelf or on your TV. TV? Who has TVs that big anymore? I'm thinking of the old days. These new flat panels, there's no way you could put a model on top of them. Then we've looked into what scales are used for what types of objects, such as 50th being mainly construction, 16th being farm, 64th being very general, 43rd being more specifically automobiles. And then finally we learned that the bigger the number, the smaller the model will be, such as a 187th is smaller than a 64th, which is smaller than an 18th. I hope from our discussion today that you have gained a much better understanding on the term scale. Also, down in the description below, there's the link to that PDF that I mentioned earlier. When you print it out, it will give you a rough idea as to what size a model should be in what scale. Now, this will be great for your collection to make sure that you're collecting the scales that fit with what you want. It also will give you a good idea as to how close those designers and those toy model makers really are at getting to scale. Now, next week, I'm going to discuss die casting and taking the plans to building a model. And as always, please comment, like, subscribe, and ring that bell below to keep up with all of my videos. Until next time, I'm Logan, the 64th Gear Jammer Skeele, and this is Toy Talk.